Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
And I'm Dan Ming. From melting pot to merit-based, U.S. President Donald Trump hopes a shift in immigration policy will protect American workers.
But is a skill-based immigration policy a good idea? That's today on The Stream.
My name is Alex Narasta, and I'm the Immigration Policy Analyst at the Cato Institute, and I'm on The Stream.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. That's a part of the inscription on the Statue of Liberty in New York City.
And for years, it had been the embodiment of immigration policy in the United States. But that could change. Last week, President Donald Trump announced plans to drastically overhaul the policy by adopting a merit-based system. The proposed legislation would curb the current chain migration system while giving English speakers priority when obtaining U.S. residency cards. The plan also limits the number of refugees granted permanent status.
So what values and ideas should guide the U.S. immigration system? Well, here in the studio to discuss that, we have Robert Law. He's a government relations director with the Federation for American Immigration Reform, also known as FAIR. In Staten Island, New York, Gonzalo Mercado. He's the executive director of La Colmena Community Job Center and the New York coordinator of the National Day Laborer Organizing Network. In Atlanta, Georgia, Aisha Yaqub. She's the policy director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. And in Toronto, Canada, Joel Sandaluk. He's an immigration lawyer and leader of the Immigration Litigation Group at his law firm. Welcome, everyone, to The Stream. Robert, I want to start with you. And this headline here that our international community is probably well aware of by now: Trump backs drastic changes to legal immigration. What about this proposed plan makes for good policy?
So thanks for the question. Basically what this bill does, known as the RAISE Act, which was introduced by two Republican senators, Tom Cotton and David Perdue, it for the first time recognizes that the American people should be the primary stakeholder in our immigration policy. So instead of a policy which we currently have, where 2/3 of our green cards go to someone just based on a family relationship, and only 1 out of every 15 green cards go to someone based on their skills, it completely reverses that ratio, prioritizing skills, those who can best assimilate into American society and contribute to the American economy, while at the same time limiting family migration to the nuclear family, the spouse and minor children.
Gonzalo, what do you make of that?
You know, as you may know, people of us from all over the world, and this is just goes against everything we believe in, goes against the history of family migration that the United States have had since the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1965. Which is not perfect, but it really shows the world that we as a nation value our family. And yes, we also value the economic contribution of immigrants, but we're not going to subject our family values in order to do that.
Well, if I can jump back in real quick, you know, this bill doesn't prevent an individual from bringing their family here. It just limits it to the core nuclear family. You know, when in our current system, if you bring in your spouse and then your spouse sponsors her brother, who then can bring in his wife, who brings in her father, you're so far removed from the original immigrant that came here that it's basically one person has the effect of transporting their entire family over time to the United States. And that's not exactly, you know, maintaining a core family. That's just relocating people to the U.S.
I want to talk about this, about bringing families to the U.S., which has been the policy for decades now, and this proposal to shift to a merit-based system. Aisha, I want to get you into the conversation. We got this video comment from Ricky. Take a listen.
My grandmother immigrated to this country in 1961, fleeing communist Cuba. She didn't have more than an elementary school education or know the language, but she worked hard and she found a job as a seamstress here in Miami and raised her 4 kids on her own. When my mother was left a single parent when I was 7 years old, my grandmother stepped in and took care of us while my mother worked 2 jobs. And she always pushed us to get a good education so we can go to college and one day get a good paying job so we can support our family and then support her and my mother in their old age. That's our American dream. Unfortunately, the Trump administration wants to narrow the scope of what it means to be a legal immigrant. He believes that only high-skilled workers should be entering this country legally. Well, if that were the case, my grandmother would have never been able to come to this country, and I would never be able to sit here running for Congress in South Florida.
So Aisha, Ricky kind of gets on this point. There's this idea that certain types of immigrants, people without a university degree, people who don't speak English or don't speak it very well, can't succeed in the United States. Do you think that is true?
I definitely do not think that's true at all. And I thank Ricky for sharing his message, because it's similar to so many other stories that we've seen here in Georgia, especially the home place of our Senator David Perdue, who sponsored this bill. That story is very similar to me in that my father came here literally 4 months before I was born, and was able to start a business and start a larger investment company that has been able to bring the rest of our family members here. He's been able to sponsor family and really help them grow their own businesses. Now, you know, for my family, we were able to do that and successfully bring over all of our siblings and my eldest sister, who actually suffers from spina bifida. Now, if it were not for my parents being able to come over here, she would not have been able to get the proper accommodations, the proper health care that they would not have had back home in Pakistan. Literally this year is when a lot of the school districts in Pakistan got accessible school buses. I mean, if you think about that timeline, it makes no sense. And so for our family being able to come here with that added benefit of having my father, who was able to start his business, was a life changer. And I know that's the same story for a lot of immigrants that come here.
You know, so picking up on a point you made earlier, Robert, you hear Aisha there talking about how the extended family can then support that nuclear family, but I'd wager to say that doesn't make that much of a difference to you, because the whole point is they're bringing more and more people here when it's not about that first original person who immigrated to the U.S.
Right. At some point, you just have to cut off that chain, and the rest of the family has to sort of earn their own way there through the merit-based system. You know, unless you're going to have a policy where unlimited migration can come into the United States, someone is going to be excluded. Right now, we have backlogs because of the current system, and those people are having to wait to come in. So unless you're just going to open the door to absolutely everybody, which is just not a sustainable policy, and I don't think anyone here is calling for that, then you have to put up some reasonable limitations to that. And that's where prioritizing the nuclear family and then having a merit-based system that's on points. It doesn't require that you have a particular degree or require that you are proficient in English. It just rewards more points for the better educated you are, the higher your English proficiency is. It's a points system on a tier base. It's not a hard and dry line.
But Robert, there's an assumption that the family members aren't contributing as much to the U.S. economy as someone who get in through this merit-based system. Is that true?
Right now, what we see is over 51% of immigrant-headed households end up on some form of welfare. And unfortunately, there are too many people that just are low-skilled or lower educated, and they just are not able to really get that American dream that you talk about. And it's wonderful for those who are able to succeed, but too many just don't have the skills to succeed in our society. And then when they eventually are eligible for welfare, they end up on those taxpayer-provided programs, and that's not the American dream that anybody is aspiring for when they're trying to leave their country of origin.
So Joel, I want to bring you in here because, of course, this plan is similar to plans, as you know, in Canada and Australia. You hear people pointing them out. This is a headline recently in the New York Times. It's an opinion piece. Canada's ruthlessly smart immigration policy. Is that how you would describe Canada's policy, Joel?
I think that's how you can describe part of the policy. I mean, one of the realities of Canada's immigration system is that we've had a points-based system since the late 1960s. And by and large, the system has functioned very, very effectively. I think one of the problems is that when you look at the system as though it's going to either, favor skilled workers to the detriment of family members, there's going to be a problem with it. But the reality is that both of these systems can really operate at the same time. When you look at the way that Canada's immigration system functions, not only is there a skilled worker process and a process for foreign students and workers, there's also a low-skilled process for people who are agricultural workers or hospitality workers in areas of the country where those jobs are in need. There's also a family reunification program and also a program for refugees, people who are either in Canada seeking refugee protection or people who are overseas seeking refugee protection. All of these things have to really function in concert. Even when you take the position that it's not a good idea to bring so many family members, one of the things that a lot of people in Canada, the United States, and other Western countries have to bear in mind is that we compete for the best immigrants around the world. And one of the realities is that a lot of people don't want to come to a country where they can't bring their family members. And what's going to happen is Canada or the United States or Australia will lose out on the best immigrants possible because they don't want to relocate to a country where they'll be essentially alone.
So we have a tweet here about Australia, which has a similar system to Canada, as you were saying, Joel. Chio says, definitely, organized immigration has been a key factor in Australia's growth. Visas are granted according to the country's needs. So Gonzalo, what do you think about that visas and immigration should be based on the specific economic needs of the country?
I disagree. I think immigration should be looked at on the economic factors, on family factors, on political conflict that happens all over the world that drives migration. I think that a lot of times we concentrate on the bandages to immigration solutions, and we don't really see the root causes of migration. So we can actually attack that instead of proposing restrictionist ideas and proposals. I also want to mention just to Joel that the study that he was mentioning earlier, that same study was actually that was done by the Center for Immigration Studies. The Cato Institute, which is a libertarian institute, looked at the study with the numbers that they used very carefully, and they realized that, yes, if you look at the whole picture, when immigrant families, of course, have larger families, but they're actually likely less to apply for benefits. And even if you're a green card holder, you're not allowed to even apply for any federal benefits until after 5 years. So the whole notion that we're basing these type of proposals, that one, they're not bipartisan, so I don't know where this is going to go. But two, that punishes what certain class of immigrants or family-based migration because of economic reasons. We're once again putting people against each other and not really focuses on the real solutions that what we have to do if we really want a comprehensive immigration reform. I've been involved in this since we had the Kennedy-McCain bill, so many years ago. It was probably the closest that we got to a comprehensive immigration reform solution that obviously failed.
So, Robert,
I think the counter argument.
Go ahead, Joel. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the counter argument to that would be to say that one of the advantages of having a skills-based immigration program is that generally people have a better feeling about immigrants. Most Canadians actually feel that immigrants are net contributors to the economy, all immigrants. And one of the realities that that causes is it allows people to open Canada up a little bit more. The process of resettling 55,000 Syrian refugees was incredibly popular in Canada. Opening our doors to more foreign students, more foreign workers is very popular. And what's happened is Canada's been able to, by and large, avoid a lot of the nativism that's affected the United States, Western Europe, and a lot of other countries in the world.
What are your tips for how Canada has been able to avoid the nativism in your view?
I think what's happened is that Canada has a very positive experience with immigration and multiculturalism. What's happened is Canadians have really adopted multiculturalism as part of our national identity. And while a lot of countries see it as something negative, sort of something that diminishes their national character, Canadians can feel it as part of their national character. And one of the side effects of this is it makes us more open to accepting people who are seeking asylum, people who need landing on humanitarian or compassionate grounds or other reasons. So what happens is the entire system really does function together in a much more in some ways hard-nosed, in other ways very humane way.
So, Joel, I think you hit that right on the nail. I mean, there are so many people here in Georgia and across the country that do value immigrants and that do understand the need to be open with, have open arms and welcome immigrants and refugees. I argue that that's actually the sentiment of most of the people that we're talking to right now about this immigration bill, and it's just not being reflected by our senators, especially those here from Georgia.
And yet one of those senators is Perdue here, your constituent of Senator Perdue. This is a headline. You wrote this, Robert, direct this to you. The Cotton-Perdue RAISE Act is a refreshing effort to help American workers. So you do see a benefit of this, and it is a benefit, though, to laborers here in the United States.
Absolutely. For the last 50 plus years, we have had a policy of mass, primarily low-skilled immigrants coming in legally. And the result of that is when you increase the supply of workers at the blue-collar or lower end of the working force, it suppresses wages. And so what you've seen is that wages have flatlined or they've decreased. And in many instances, what you've seen is a direct replacement of American workers, primarily in the construction industry. That used to, and particularly in Los Angeles in the 80s, that was a primarily well-respected African-American job. And now it's almost exclusively primarily Spanish-speaking people of Hispanic origin. They're displacing them, and then Americans find themselves on long-term unemployment, welfare, and other things, and they don't have the opportunities. So
is it necessarily displacement, or is it, as some would argue, those people who were previously in those jobs don't want those jobs or are now in other roles and jobs?
Well, I'd say that they're definitely not in other roles because our workforce participation rate is at historical low levels. And what you're finding is that there are not jobs that Americans will not do. There are wages and conditions that they won't subject themselves to. And so when you have an immigrant who comes into the United States from a poor country, any wage is going to be better than what they would be getting in their home country. And so they're willing to settle for a wage, say $4 or $5, just to arbitrarily throw out a figure, where an American worker says, I value my services, and the market values those services at, say, $8 or $10. And so, of course, the employer is always going to look to pad their bottom line, and as long as the work is done, they don't particularly care who the workforce is.
So really where this fight should be taken is to the minimum wage fight and not necessarily to the immigration fight. But I know community wanted to get in here, Dan. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we actually have a tweet on that. So Gareth tweeted and he said, one concern is agriculture. So this is an industry we could talk about. Minimum wage laws created a black market for labor. Most Americans would rather take welfare than go into fields. And then Angie tweeted us this. It's out of California. It's a news story about entire fields rotting because there aren't migrant laborers to work in the fields. And we know California's economy, a huge part of it is agriculture. So Gonzalo, what do you think about what Rob just said, that there are no jobs that Americans won't do?
Well, I think that's, we have a history of migration. Here in New York, for example, day laborers are not just Latino, and also the implying that Latinos are not citizens, it's just also wrong. They're taking jobs away from African Americans, and again, it's just another attempt to put our communities against each other. We have an incredible history of how immigrants helped build this great city. All of our bridges here, were done by Italian or Irish day laborers who were standing on corners trying to get jobs, 100 years ago. And we had the same nativist anti-immigrant sentiment back then, probably by the Know Nothing Party, which was the first party to use the fear of the foreigner to win elections. And back then it wasn't, Muslims or Latinos. It was Italian and Irish. And it wasn't, it wasn't Muslims. It was Catholics, So I think, we really have to have a historical context. Also, the reason the jobs are scarce or have gone are not because, immigrants are coming from Mexico taking jobs away from American workers. It is because those corporations are taking those jobs overseas. And of course, we cannot compete with the wages that people have or are paying in India or in Bangladesh and other workers, where most of manufacturing workers jobs went out. So we really need to bring all of this to the table if we really want to have a comprehensive solution. If we're really going to revamp our history. Our history is different than Canada, and it's different than Australia. Our history of immigrants and immigrants coming here to contribute and not to assimilate, but to integrate. We don't use the word assimilation because that means that you're going to forget everything that you came with into this country. We believe that actually you have not only your contributions with your label, but also with your culture, with your music, with your way of life. This is how immigrants make this country great, and how people from all over the world can come here and have their identity as an American.
And Gonzalo, as you're talking, Aisha's nodding there. Aisha, what did you want to add?
I mean, I agree 100%. I don't think that this bill is at all about protecting American workers. I think that this bill is a distraction from other root causes of issues that we're seeing today. We talked about, the wages and the working conditions. That's not the fault of immigrants. I mean, there were 300% turnover rates for some of the poultry farms here in Georgia, and that's not because of immigrants. They were able to come and take those jobs because of those conditions, because no one else was doing them. And so I don't think that this bill should be distracting us from the larger issues of the anti-working class agenda. I think that's really what it is. It's trying to distract us and blame a certain group of people for the larger issues at play.
So Aisha, speaking of the blame that's might be going on, that's often seen in immigration discussions, immigration debates, we got this video comment from Yesenia. Take a listen.
Trump's Race Act cutting the number of green cards shows that his administration's true and ongoing intent is on targeting people of color, including non-white immigrants. In the past, this nation's immigration laws gave preference to white Western European migrants. The immigration system that we have now under the Immigration Nationality Act of 1965 was a bold shift away from the backward thinking of race and focus on family unity. Trump's Race Act criteria, like getting more points for English, is taking us backwards and shows that he is trying to make America white again.
So, Joel, I want to give this to you. The Trump administration has pointed out how people from all over the world speak English. But in your opinion, do you think that this bill discriminates against non-white immigrants?
Not really. You know, it's interesting that Canada adopted this kind of policy specifically to get away from racial preferences. In Canada, that basically awards points for either English or French because we're a bilingual nation. Our top 5 immigrant accept producing nations are the Philippines, China, Pakistan, India. The United States, which is arguably the whitest country on the list, is a very distant 6th behind Pakistan. There's a lot of, and it's also one factor out of many. So I don't think that that having a preference for English language makes the legislation inherently racist. I do think, however, that it will definitely skew in that direction. I think it's a fair criticism. You know, one of the things that's interesting about this this whole debate is that if you're going to really have a piece of legislation that is responsive to the labor market, you're going to find a place for foreign workers in all areas of industry where they're needed, whether it's in IT, whether it's as university professors, or whether it's as people who are working in fields or working in the hospitality industry. But that doesn't really seem to be the purpose of what's going on. One of the real interesting things about this, and if you compare it with Canada, is Canada last year accepted over 300,000 immigrants. Now, this you've got to bear in mind is a country that's less than 10 times this, or less than 10% of the size of the United States. You know, if this was really going to be adopting a more Canadian approach, you'd be increasing the number of immigrants. It's interesting not only to bring in a preference based on skills, but also there's a talk of a massive reduction in the number of immigrants. And what that basically means is that you're going to be servicing the American labor market, it appears, by reducing the number of immigrants altogether, not by bringing in the right ones, but by just basically reducing everyone. And that seems to be what's really causing a lot of concern.
So, Robert, quickly before we run out of time here, does this actually have a possibility of passing?
Well, it's certainly a good idea. And just to sort of respond really quickly to that question, the ideas in the RAISE Act have been around for over 20 years. And what many of your viewers may not be aware of is that the Bipartisan Jordan Commission, which came into existence under President Bill Clinton, a Democrat, and was led by a civil rights icon in Barbara Jordan, recommended basically every single component that you see in the RAISE Act to cut legal immigration to $550,000 a year, which is what the RAISE Act would effectively do, to make it more merit-based and to shrink family-based immigration to the nuclear family. So really, it's not an ideas issue that we have, it's a who's the messenger. There was no opposition.
Although, of course, it didn't pass, so we are back.
Well,
there.
they were just recommendations. It wasn't legislation at the time. They were just never implemented because Congress is unfortunately easily distracted with other things. But that doesn't take away that these were good ideas in the 90s, and it's been 20 years of inaction. But there was no outrage that this was targeting particular groups of people. And in fact, the Gang of Hate bill in 2013.
Robert, I'm going to pause you there. Good idea there. I know others don't think the same way. I'm going to thank all of our guests now because we are out of time. A big thank you, of course, also to our community for being part of this show. And until next time, we'll see you online. In August, we marked the 70th anniversary of the 1947 partition of India with a full week of special shows on the stream. And we want to feature your stories. If you have a family member with experiences from partition, we want to hear from you. Share your family story with us by uploading a short video to our website at stream.aljazeera.com/join, or tweet us your family photos using the hashtag partition@70. We'll feature them in our coverage. And join us for our week of shows. The theme of our coverage, Living Partition, starting on August 14th. See you then.